I'm Johnny Buchanan. In this video, we're going to look at how to use one plugin as another plugin. Specifically, what we're going to do is to use a noise gate to create the effect of a Transient Designer. Now, before I explain what those two things do, let's just have a listen to a section of the track that we're going to be working on. Effectively, this is the two sort of drum or percussion stems from a sort of trailer style project. There's a bunch of percussion low and percussion mid and high instruments, and effectively they're combining to produce this quite impactful piece. Okay, so there's a section of those tracks, and you can see that I've actually got two track stacks within this project. One for percussion low, which contains these instruments here, which have all been bounced down to audio. And then separately, I've got a collection of high and mid percussion instruments as well, all of which are also sort of combining to that overall effect. Now, at the very beginning, what I did was to mention two particular types of plugin, a noise gate and a Transient Designer. Well, we know about noise gates. What they effectively allow us to do is to sort of effectively dynamically control volume. A noise gate sets a threshold, and for the gate to open and therefore the sound to be heard, the volume has to exceed that threshold. And if it does that, then the sound, we can hear it. And if it doesn't get loud enough, then the gate never opens. And effectively what we're doing is we're sort of filtering out the volume of that sound. What we can do with a noise gate is to effectively control the way that its volume behaves. So that's what a noise gate is. A Transient Designer effectively takes what we call the transient of a sound, the initial attack portion of a sound, and it separates that from its decay or sustain portion. So if we take drums, like we have within this project, we can think of the fact that the very beginning of a note is going to be the loudest part, and we can potentially enhance or push the volume of that transient portion, at the same time as then being able to separately control the volume of what happens afterwards. So with drums like this, what we can do is to sort of enhance the attack, whilst at the same time as slightly pulling out some of the kind of more reverby, decaying phase of the drum overall. Now, what we can actually do is to use a noise gate to achieve the effect of a Transient Designer, and that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to just mute the mid-high percussion stem. I'm going to come to the percussion low stem, and what I'm going to do is to go and find the noise gate, which is a dynamic effect. I'm going to come down to noise gate and just select that plugin. So as I said, to start with, what happens with a noise gate is that the volume has to exceed the threshold point. So my first control is to set the point where I want this threshold to be set. The lower it is in terms of volume, the easier it is for the volume to exceed it, and therefore the whole of the sound will be heard. And if I keep this at minus 50 dB, I don't think it will begin to gate the sound at all. What I'm going to do is to press play, listen to this section, and I'm going to push the threshold to the point where we're beginning to hear it gate. And you can hear that it now is. We're hearing those initial transient impacts, but we're then hearing that the gate is closing as each of that sort of combined collection of drum sounds together sort of begins to decay. Effectively, the volume drops below the threshold, and therefore the gate closes. Okay, so we've got a threshold point. What I can also do is to change the attack time, which I'm going to do. I'm going to make it 0 milliseconds, which means that the sound is just going to open immediately, so we get all of that transient. Now, there's just a chance that's going to lead to a little bit of audio clicking, which I'm keen to avoid. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is to engage this look ahead option, which means that Logic will look ahead, literally, into the audio that's coming, and by buying myself a little bit of look ahead time, effectively that should produce a slightly more natural result from an attack point of view. What I'm also going to do is to slightly increase the release time, and what that means is that as the volume drops below the threshold, rather than simply just switching off immediately, it will hang around for just a little bit longer. Okay, I'm just going to drop the threshold 1 dB as well to -19, so a little bit more of that signal is getting through. Okay, so far we're gating a sound in quite a traditional way. Yes, we've changed a couple of parameters, but mostly the noise gate is doing what noise gates do. So what is this sort of defining characteristic of a noise gate? Well, the fact that it shuts volume down altogether when a signal drops below the threshold point. So what if we don't let it? What if instead of applying this extreme volume reduction, instead what we do is to only allow the volume to back down, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 dB instead? Well, we can do that by changing the reduction dial here. As I dial this up, effectively what I'm doing is controlling how much volume drops away when the gate closes. Now, if I was to actually set this at 0 dB, the sound would continue to gate, but effectively there would be no volume reduction because we aren't turning the volume down, which means that this will sound now like the original signal. So sure enough, even though we've preserved our threshold point, now the gate doesn't close. But if instead what I do is to drop volume by, let's say, -6 dB, now the volume is going to close, but rather than going to silence, it's going to drop 6 decibels in volume, certainly enough for us to hear it, but it's still going to retain some of the decay portion of the sound. Now, what I'm going to do now is to A-B that, because at the moment you're probably thinking, okay, well that sounds like the original drum part. But in particular, don't listen to the attack portion of each drum. Instead, listen to the reverb or decay stage, all of that sort of ambience that's in the drums, which is going to be really loud when we're not gating the signal, and it's going to be much less loud when I re-engage it. Okay, so we're hearing it. Now we're still getting a few little clicks. Again, I can adjust those by maybe having the hold time stick around for a little bit longer so that the sound holds before it closes. I might add 1 millisecond to the attack time just so we're not getting clicks at the front. And I could slightly increase the release time as well if I want to. And maybe I could even increase the look ahead time as well. So effectively we're managing the way that the shape of that sound works, but you can hear really clearly now that what we're doing is losing quite a lot of volume out of the kind of ambience of these sounds. Now you might be thinking, well, why on earth would you want to do that? Well, with drums isolated like this, in a sense, yep, that's not an easy question to answer because it's quite nice to have all of that ambience. But drums like this, particularly in trailer music, take up an enormous amount of space. This ambience is where you're also going to have kind of pulsing synth parts, synth basses, other sounds, maybe some sort of more traditional drums on top, loads of things that are enjoying having some access to that kind of low mid-range. And if you fill all of that space up in your mix with the kind of decay portion of your drums, that's loads of mix room that you're using, which maybe you don't need. Often what we want from drums is all this punch in the attack. We don't need quite so much ambience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the percussion low part, and what we're going to do is to re-engage the percussion high and mid parts. And again, what I'm going to do is to gate these, but because this is a different collection of sounds, I suspect that the values that we're going to need are going to be slightly different from a threshold point of view. So what I'm going to do is to configure this just as we're listening back. Okay, so we're still getting all of that impact, but what we're beginning to do now is to kind of attenuate what happens in the back end. What I'm going to do again is just A/B these. I'm going to punch both of these in, gated, I'll take them out, and again, we'll just hear the kind of A and B, the before and after. So what we've done in this video is to look at how we can use noise gates as transient designers. Effectively, remember what Transient Designer plugins do is to sort of split the portion of sounds into this kind of attack phase and then the decay or release phase, and sort of provide you with volume controls over both. We can use a noise gate to do that. Logic's own noise gate can provide us with access to this kind of effect that normally we'd have to buy separately. And the key is how much volume attenuation or reduction we apply when we've gated a signal. Normally gates turn volume down to minus infinity, so effectively that sound is just turned off. The moment we take that reduction down to -3, -4, -5, maybe -6 dB, what we're doing is we're retaining some of the decay portion of the sound, so we still get a natural sounding effect, but at the same time we're freeing up loads of mix space.